Okay, so we have our representative axle here that we're working on. This is how it would be in a vehicle. So this is your inner C here that's welded onto your axle tube. In the upper portion of this C, you have a threaded hole, and that hole is what your upper kingpin is threaded into. So we've already removed our upper kingpin. It uses a 7/8 Allen key to remove that. We're going to show you the process of how to install those parts now. So what we like to do is we've got our upper kingpin here that we talked about in the parts breakdown of our kit. You're going to want to take a little bit of your red Loctite. Probably do it in 4 spots evenly around the threads. And then you're going to want to thread this in to your upper kingpin. And then take your 7/8 Allen key that we talked about before. And torque that down. Okay, so now that we've got our upper kingpin installed, I'm going to rotate the axle over, and we'll talk about how to install the race and the cup for the lower kingpin. Okay, so you're going to take the cup here that's included in our kit. So you want to have the concave side facing the bearing. You put that in, and then you want to have the flat side of the race facing the cup. Go ahead and start this race. Okay, so then once you got it flat with the C, you take your race, your old race, and match the side here that you're hitting in, and use the race to drive in the new race. Okay, so once you've used your race to get it countersunk into the housing, pull your race out and finish it off with a punch so that you don't damage the edge of the race. Okay, so once you've got the race installed, you can check your cup and make sure that it's sandwiched tight in between the housing and the race. Make sure that you wipe this out, get any debris out that's in there, and then now we need to pack our lower kingpin bearing with grease, and we'll show you how to do that. Okay, so to pack the bearing, you're going to want to take some of your grease, put it on the palm of your hand this way. If you look at your bearing, you're going to have a more open side than the other side. This is the side that you're going to want to use to pack the grease into. You want to take that in your hand, and you want to push the bearing into the grease and pack it in between the rollers on the bearing until you can start to see the grease push up through the opposite side, and you just keep rotating the bearing and pushing the grease up until you go all the way around and have the grease pushed up through the bearing. Okay, so now that we've got our bearing packed with grease, you're going to want to drop this into the race that we installed into the housing. And then the next part is going to be the lower kingpin seal, and I'll take my dirty gloves off and show you how to do that. Okay, so this is our lower kingpin seal here. So the next step you're going to want to do is take a little bit of silicone and line the outside of the seal with the silicone. Spread it evenly around the seal. And then you're going to want to install this seal with the rubber side facing facing opposite the bearing so that it can fit over the bearing. And then you can use a socket or a piece of pipe that matches the outside of the seal and tap that seal in. So after you get the seal driven in, you want to make sure that that seal is flush with the C on the lower, and this one looks like it went in well. Okay, so now that we're done with the lower kingpin, we need to get our steering knuckle, and we can show you how the rest goes together. Okay, so once we've got the lower kingpin seal installed, now we need to work on getting our steering knuckle attached to the housing. So the first thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to take your upper kingpin seal, and you're going to want to put a little bit of grease on that seal on the inside, and then install your seal on your upper kingpin. And after you've installed that, then you can install the steering knuckle over your upper kingpin and onto the seal for the lower. Okay, so once we've got our steering knuckle slid over our inner C, next thing we like to do is take a little bit of silicone, and we'll need to get some silicone in between our lower kingpin and our steering knuckle. And then after you get your silicone on there, you're going to want to take some grease. Grease the lower kingpin where the seal rides. Make sure you don't damage the seal, and it will help you install the kingpin into the steering knuckle as well. Install the post of the lower kingpin into the bearing first, and then it will slide into place on the steering knuckle. Okay, so once you've installed your lower kingpin, you can go ahead and thread in the bolts that you took out previously. Put a little Loctite on the threads before you install those. And then torque them down. Okay, so now that we have our lower kingpin installed, we'll flip the axle over and we'll start working on the upper kingpin. Okay, so now that we've got our axle flipped over, we've got the top side of our steering knuckle exposed with our upper kingpin. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our nylon bushing, and we're going to want to grease that. Make sure you grease the inside well. There's some little grooves in this bushing. Make sure that you fill those grooves full of grease. And then if you look at this bushing right here, there's a little notch that's part of this bushing. There's a corresponding notch in the steering knuckle, and you're going to want to, when you install it, you're going to want to make sure that you line that notch up with the cutout in the steering knuckle. Okay, so now you've got the bushing installed. The next piece is going to be your spring retainer. You're going to want to install this spring retainer with the flat side against the bushing so that the inside of your spring will sit just like that. Before we put those on, let's get a little bit of silicone, and we'll coat the top of our steering knuckle with silicone, and then we'll install our gasket, and we'll go from there. Now there is a gasket installed with our kits. We just like to make sure that we're not going to have any problems, so we put a little bit of silicone on here in addition to the gasket. Okay, so then once you silicone that, lay your gasket down. Install your retainer in your spring. And then on your upper kingpin, coat the mating surface for the gasket with silicone as well. And then you'll reinstall your 4 bolts that you removed from the upper. You're going to want to use Loctite on these bolts as well. You're going to want to install these bolts in a pattern so that you don't get the cap crooked as you try and tighten these bolts. Try and tighten them in a diagonal pattern. Okay, so once you've got your upper kingpin caps torqued down, you'll need to go through and grease your upper and lower kingpins, and then you can move on to installing your spindle.